The next hand is raised is Denise Savageau.
into the local communities, local towns to work on projects. And so because we know that a lot of the deaths are happening on the roads in our communities and not necessarily just on state roads. So we're working on that. The key thing to remember is that our capital plan requires all ongoing funding obligations to be shown. And also we leverage all federal funds. So we're trying to maximize the use of federal funds and make sure that we are not turning any federal funds back in. A few years ago, when the last federal authorization bill came out, the term asset management became the buzzword for all the state DOTs. This was basically a process that was put in place to identify and label each one of our assets and determine where it is. Is it in a state of good repair? What is the funding necessary to get to there? What is our investment strategies? What do we have invested and what do we need to get invested? It's based on data-driven principles. And so it's much more in depth, but it does influence and drive our whole program. It was published in 2022. It'll be published in 2026. There's two of them. One of them is for public transportation and one of them is for highway. Highways and bridges has to be submitted to FHWA and has to be certified. The other one, the public transit, is a self-certified program. This just shows you something that we got national recognition for that we came up with. Something I didn't come up with it, but a very smart staff member came up with it. This was a fact sheet. This is a really good, quick snapshot for providing information on a particular asset. What you see in front of you is bridge and pavement. What it does show is it shows you what investment is necessary in order to meet the goals of the program. It shows you what the goals of the program are, what we're trying to achieve. It also shows you how much money we have invested in that and what does that result in and how are we making progress. Right now we have 17 of these. We're only really required to do the 2 you see from the Federal Highway Administration, but we've actually decided that we needed to expand that. We right now have 17 fact sheets and we keep creating more for more assets. So this is available to you online and can give you a quick snapshot on where we're on with every one of our assets. We have 11 on the highway bridge side and 6 on the public transportation side. One of the discussions that keeps coming up, and I think you probably may have heard the word planning environmental linkage, PELs. That's been thrown around a lot. If you do hear that PEL, there's a process that we put in place where we use the ability to do PELs to eliminate alternatives during the pre-NEPA phase, National Environment Protection Act, in order to get through the NEPA phase more quickly. The advantage of doing PELs studies, planning studies up front, is that we can then get through that process and break out and advance early action items as well as midterm action items while the NEPA process is ongoing. So we break the linkage between the NEPA process and early action items that we know have independent utility that we can advance as a project. This is a key point, and it's something that we've adopted within the DOT in order to get projects completed more quickly. All the things I talked about, they're all on our website, and here are the linkages, the links so that you take this slideshow and you can go to each one of these. So you can look at the asset management plan, the advertising project schedules. We have been making a concerted effort to be forthright with all the information and be transparent with what we're working on. One of the things that we did recently create is the last one, which is the active project map and open portal data. That might be a lot of use for all of you to get projects, understand projects in your area that are being worked on or to refer your constituents to. This does go through and particularly shows on the map every project that's either in design or construction. Where are they? If you click on the particular project, it'll come up and it'll tell you your design and construction schedule, how much funding it is, where we are in the process, and it'll also give you some contact information to be able to reach out to someone to talk to you about the project. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Jim Fallon, our Assistant Chief Engineer.
Okay, so thanks, Scott. So I'm Jim Fallon, Assistant Chief Engineer in Bureau of Engineering and Construction. Scott provided information on agency overview and some transportation documents and priorities. I'm going to walk you through steps in development of the capital plan, talk a little bit about funding, and then also talk about projects and programs that are within the capital plan. Keeping in mind that this is a multi-year, multi-billion-dollar capital plan. So I'll provide you with some snapshots and you guys can go back and look for specific projects if you're interested, or we can get into that when we get into questions. Next slide. So just generally in terms of steps in the development of the capital plan, there's 5 primary steps, and I'll walk through each one of those. But we identify, we categorize, we apply metrics, we solicit feedback, and then we program, and then a project gets into the capital plan. So the first step is to identify, projects are identified through a multitude of different resources. Sometimes there's public outreach, there's corridor studies, there's regional plans or statewide plans. Projects may also come out of data-driven analysis as it relates to safety, congestion. Scott talked about asset management, so that's another way that projects are also identified. Talk a little bit about purpose and need. That may be something that you hear about from the DOT team. So purpose and need, it's not a project description, but rather it's why we're doing the project. What is it that we're trying to accomplish? And one of the benefits of having a purpose and need is that as we go through the design phase and we're evaluating alternatives and we get stakeholder input, really by looking back at the purpose and need, we understand what is our primary focus, what are we trying to accomplish in the job, what is critical, what really can't be flexible, and we need to make sure that it's accomplished as part of the project. So that talks a little bit about purpose and need and project identification. Slide. We then categorize projects, and really what this helps us in doing is, depending on the category and also the complexity, projects take different paths. And so clearly defined solutions are maybe the simpler ones. So something like a state of good repair, a bridge rehabilitation, some signing upgrades, some traffic signal things. Those generally can go along in a fairly linear and defined manner. Secondly is another category is to provide enhancement or improvements. Those are medium complexity. Those could be interchange improvements. Waterbury line improvements is another example of a medium complexity. Those are a little bit more, take some more time to develop and things of that nature. And then last is major programs and initiatives. Typically what happens there, we have a vision, some of the PELs that Scott talked about, those are typically major programs or initiatives. We have a vision of what we're trying to accomplish, and then individual projects break out from that vision that may take multiple years to accomplish. So an example of that, Q Bridge Corridor Program, which is completed, 91-691-15 program, that's going to take multiple years. The time for CT on the rail side is another major program initiative. I'll talk a little bit later about the Greater Hartford Mobility Study, obviously another major program, multi-year, multi-billion-dollar program. So those are major programs and initiatives as an example in categorizing. We do apply metrics. That's the third step in terms of development of the projects and the program. And those, we apply generally mobility, safety, asset management, asset condition, freight movement, economic development, how are we supporting growth, what is going on in certain areas of the state. In a lot of those areas, we have data that helps to quantify. Really what we're trying to do is what is the benefit of the particular project or program, and how can we quantify it. So by applying a metrics, that helps to give us some idea of prioritization or need for one project versus another. So that's talking about metrics. The fourth step is to solicit feedback. So on the graphic here, it talks about the feedback that happens during the development of the capital plan. So like Scott said, it's an iterative process. We send out projects to the regions, we get comments, we address those comments. Sometimes that's not necessarily something that we can handle in that particular year. Maybe it becomes something that we have handle in the next year. So we do that within development of the capital plan. I will also say that in terms of at the policy level, we had a state statewide long-range plan. There's the strategic highway safety plan. There's a number of transportation planning documents where we're getting feedback and input, and those are also driving decisions. So important to note there. And then also during individual projects, once a project is in the capital plan and we're doing some designs and we're meeting with stakeholders, there's also obviously feedback that happens post project initiation. And then the last step in the roadmap, if you will, to the capital plan is the program. Projects have different sizes, different costs, or on different schedules. They have eligibility requirements. There's roadway classifications, things of that nature. Geographic location also comes into play, especially on the federal fund standpoint. So when our folks in finance administration, once we've identified the project and we have a budget and schedule, they're the ones who are responsible for programming and getting projects into the right bucket, if you will. So that's the roadmap in terms of getting projects into the program. Talk a little bit about capital program funding. So you guys may have seen this slide. This is walking through the development of the federal reauthorization, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. This is only federal formula funding. So this is exclusive of state matching funds. So if you look back in 2021, between federal highway and FTA, we're running about 750 million during the course of the next 3 to 4 years. That number is anticipated to go to about 1.1 billion. Again, that's just federal formula funds. And so that's the available funding that we have to the department. In terms of timeline, so the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act was passed in November of 2021. That was a 5-year reauthorization on the federal side for FY 22 through 26. We're in year 2. So we're already halfway through, give or take, or getting there on the 5-year reauthorization. Every year there's a budget reauthorization that is required to be passed by Congress that basically gives us access to the money that is authorized through the highway bill. Last year it happened in March. The federal fiscal year starts in October, so that was halfway through the federal fiscal year. This year it was passed in December, so in terms of FY 23 we were good to go in terms of having our money. And then a large component of the reauthorization bill is discretionary funds. I'll give some more detail about that, but basically USDOT is doing the notice of funding opportunities. Those are discretionary programs in a whole host of different areas with eligibility and guidance and things like that. The unit that Scott talked about, the grants unit, has been largely responsible and it's been a great asset for us being able to apply for those grants and those discretionary applications, and in many cases being successful. So that's good news. Next slide. So talking about discretionary federal grants, and this is on the federal side. So we have a number of different programs where we've been successful in a number of different modes, and also a number of different funding levels. Gold Star Bridge, we're successful in bridge investment program, 160 million. We're one of 4 states in the country to get a large bridge grant. So we will continue to submit applications and go after these competitive grant opportunities. There's $100 billion that's available through the reauthorization bill over the course of the next 5 years. So this, for us, is a large emphasis area in trying to bring additional federal dollars into the state. Next slide. One of the other discretionary programs that's being administered by FRA is the Northeast Corridor, NEC. That provides $22 billion over the next 5 years. Commissioner Euclid and former Commissioner Giletti were very instrumental working last fall. This is all related to being on the NEC inventory in order to be eligible to submit for these grant applications. The grant first round was due Monday. So the grants unit and frankly, a lot of people within the department were working hard over the last 45 days or so. We submitted 13 grant applications. And so we're looking forward to hearing back on those. Usually takes a couple of months for folks to get back to us. So that's on the FRA side and discretionary grants. In terms of available funding, so along the bottom of the slide is the federal funds that I talked about. So you'll see in prior years, it was about 800 million-ish, 850. That number is anticipated to go up to about $1.1 billion during the course of the next 4 to 5 years. In the middle, we have the state funds. So in green is the funds that have already been provided. In 24 and 25, we show the state funds that are requested as part of the governor's budget, and that includes NEC grant match funds that are within that request. And then over to the far left is the Let's Go CT funding that was provided from 2016 through 2020. So overall, we're talking about $2.25 billion annual program. Frequently, we get asked, what is the growth in the program? How can you demonstrate the growth in the program? There's a lot of different ways of doing that, but we think this is a pretty good indicator of growth in the program. So this is capital expenditures, both on the federal side and the state side. And it's a lagging indicator because when we advertise projects, we award projects. Typically, it takes some time before we start incurring bills and we're getting invoices in and we're making payments. But it is a pretty good indicator of growth in the program. And we're seeing about a 6% annual growth over the last 11 years or so. And we anticipate that that will continue to grow as you see the growth in the capital program and projects that are out for advertising, and then we'll be incurring those expenditures. So lastly, I want to talk a little bit about capital projects and programs. Just to note, like I said before, this is meant to be a highlight snapshot. Within any given year, we have 250 to 300 individual phase and project entries within a capital plan. So I don't think you guys want me to go through those line by line. So when we get to it, we'll talk about public transportation, we'll talk about highway, we'll talk about some major programs, and then we'd be happy to, answer some things that you may ask as well. So first, let's just talk about safety. Obviously, safety is a large component of everything that we do, also a large component of things that every other state DOT does as well. I want to give you just a couple of highlights as it relates to safety. And, really our goal in terms of safety is to make sure that all users of our transportation system get to where they want to go and get to their final destination, right? And so we try to make strategic investments to accomplish that and to make sure that that's taken care of. So the Strategic Highway Safety Plan was done in 2022. That's a 5-year document. That is the overarching organizational document for roadway safety planning throughout the state. And that really talks about there's a mission, a vision, and the goals, and really trying to move us towards 0 deaths. And that was developed in concert with a number of different stakeholders. And again, like I said, that's a 5-year document. Another is the Vision Zero Council that was authorized by the legislature, chaired by Commissioner Euclid. Also had a number of stakeholders that were involved, number of working groups that worked during the course of 2022 and developed some recommendations for your consideration at the end of last year. And we're very fortunate in Connecticut. Safety is a collaborative effort, takes a lot of coordination, takes a lot of communication, and the Yukon is a large component of not only supporting the department, but also providing support to our local communities. And so we will continue to support Yukon and the T2 Center and working with them and supporting them. So large component of safety up there. Talk about safety funding. So within the federal program, there's a Highway Safety Improvement Program that is a $38 million annual program. There is an implementation plan that is data driven. Some example projects that are included within there: rapid flashing beacons at crosswalks on state and municipal roads, pedestrian crossing upgrades at signalized intersections. We also do high friction surface treatments to address roadway departure, curb warning signs, and signal and timing improvements. So those are within the Highway Safety Improvement Program. And there's also programs like I talked about with CHAMP, the Safety Service Patrol, and Safety Circuit Rider and Work Zone Safety, and trying to work on those things through the Highway Safety Improvement Program. Section 154 is through NHTSA. And some of the things that we do there is in terms of the Connecticut Safety Research Center, the Highway Safety Office within the department, as well as some of our DUI enforcement that we work with the locals on. And then also a small program is grade crossing improvements. That's about $1.4 million. And I think everyone's well aware of the wrong way driving. Thanks to the legislature, we have $20 million where we are trying to quickly address issues that are going on with wrong way driving. And one of the key components of that is work by our highway operations group. Obviously, we have typical capital improvements to address wrong way driving through the typical design, bid, build mechanism, but the highway ops guys are able to quickly get out and address some things on the vendor and some. We're making really good progress in terms of getting through our wrong way driving. So that's good news. Next slide. Active transportation, ped bike, as well as safety, trying to provide the right facilities for the use of these. The transportation TA program is a federal program that's $14 million. That increased from $9 million in the previous authorization. So we're making good use of that. One of the good things is we have increased if you look at the investments that are happening in this area, we're up to about 4% of our annual budget. That's a significant increase from maybe where we were 5 years ago. We'll continue to make investments in that area because it really is a quality of life and things that we hear a lot from stakeholders in terms of what they're looking for. And we have developed a state program for complete streets, trying to do some of these quick hitter programs and projects and improvements. And so hopefully we can continue to make progress there. Community connectivity is a state program, been highly successful. We get more applications than maybe we had the funding to provide, but we have increased that to $12 million a year. That also provides resources and a lot of the ped bike community centers, things like that. And then we do also address ADA compliance. So when we go out and we resurface through highway operations, our roadways and do our VIP programs, we are doing also ADA ramps and sidewalks. So that's a standalone program, about $3 to $4 million a year. And just a note, in a lot of cases, as part of our regular projects, we are addressing sidewalks, we are addressing crosswalks, we are addressing ramps and things of that nature. So these are sort of the standalones, but there's a whole bunch of other things that happen as part of our regular projects and programs. Okay, next slide. Within the reauthorization bill, one of the emphasis areas is on bridges. So the bridge formula program is $120 million of federal funds per year. So that works out to, $600 million, give or take, over the 6 years. This is a significant investment. Really what we're targeting here is to do major rehabilitation on our more significant structures. So as an example, that could be the Tomlinson Bridge in New Haven, Bissell Bridge, I-95 Bridgeport Harbor Bridge in Bridgeport, and Bulkley Bridge in Hartford. So that's what we're doing with those funds, and a lot of those rehabs end up being like 15 to 20 million. So these funds are welcome and will put good use to them. Next slide. In terms of climate and resilience, so this is within the reauthorization bill. There's a NEVI program that provides for build out of the EV network throughout the state. We had to submit a plan, policy and planning in our group down there. Worked hard last year. That got submitted, got approved, and that allows us access to the money. That's about $10 million annually over the 5 years. Carbon reduction also requires the development of plan and some of the easier projects to implement. This is a sub-allocated, so it's a little tricky, but we can do some LED illumination projects. You can do some traffic signal retiming. And so we're working hard to get some of those projects going. That's about $16 million a year over the 5 years. And then the Protect program is all about resiliency. Obviously with some of our extreme weather events and protecting our infrastructure and investing in resiliency. That's what the Protect program is all about. And that's about $18 million annually over the 5 years as well. Next slide. So again, highlight, sample some representative projects in terms of public transportation. So we are within the capital plan. There's some Move New Haven. We are doing some portions of the time program in Bridgeport, Stratford, and Norwalk. Those are within the 5 years. We also are moving forward with the Hartford line north of Hartford, double tracking. So double tracking was taken care of south of Hartford, but we're doing the north of Hartford portion. There's a number of investments in terms of equipment and fleet on the public transportation side. And then I'm going to talk a little bit further about New Haven Station campus improvements. And there's also Darien Station and some of the other improvements as well on the public transportation side. Next slide. So in terms of highway bridge, up top, we have a number of annual programs. So whether we're doing resurfacing, I talked about community connectivity. You guys are probably familiar with the LOTSA program that's administered through the COGS. CMAC is congestion mitigation. That's about a $40 million program. I talked to you about the highway safety improvement program. So those annual programs up top is about 400 million in terms of investment annually between state and federal funds. Some representative projects that will be ongoing, again, snapshot within the next 5 years. I talked about 91-6, 91-15. First phase started last year. Second phase is starting at the end of this year. Third phase will be in 23. And then Gold Star Bridge, well, series of improvements that happened there. The I-95 exit 74 interchange will be starting up over the next 4 years. That's a $180 million investment happening down there. And then we started Route 9 traffic signals, and we'll continue with subsequent phases of that. So that's some projects on the highway bridge side. In terms of New Haven campus improvements, so we are evaluating the platform replacement, traveler amenities, some information, canopy replacement. So basically a complete overhaul down at Union Station. There are some interior station improvements that are also occurring down in that area. There will also be some improvements to State Street Station in terms of platforms and pedestrian access and getting back and forth between the platforms. And then we also are looking at the West Lot Intermodal Center and making some improvements out on the street side. On the track side, we continue to make investments to maintain and operate our fleet. And we will so there's some that were recently completed, and we're always investing on the track side as well. So that gives you some idea on the New Haven side. In Stamford, we also are doing, we recently completed a little bit of a refresh down there. The escalators and elevators project is ongoing. The new parking garage is I think scheduled to be completed this year. We will demo the old parking garage, and then we are looking at a master plan in terms of what we want to do down there. And so some of the things that we're looking at is enhancing the pedestrian plaza, customer service amenities and services, looking at how we circulate traffic through that area, and then accessibility improvements for all users. And then we're also going to do, obviously down there too, we also have ongoing work on the equipment side and on the track side as well in Stamford. Next slide. Talking a little bit about Greater Hartford Mobility Study. Significant study started off on the west side of I-84 with the Etna Viaduct. We then did the 8491 interchange and understanding what's going on there. It really turned into a multimodal regional study. That's what we're currently doing. So, from east to west, we're looking at between Manchester and Farmington. On north-south, it's looking at between Windsor and Rocky Hill. It's all modes and thinking about how we can enhance mobility, also some elements of reconnecting communities. So, really the interstate system and the roadway system, if it cut off access, and how we can try to restore that, I think is the best way of putting it. So our expectation in terms of Greater Hartford Mobility Study is we will be through the Pell phase by the end of this year. We expect to have early actions and midterm projects that we can advance within the next 5 to 8 years. And then we will also be moving forward with the environmental phase for the more significant investment. So some of the other smaller scale things we can move forward with while we're thinking about how do we address the long-term solutions. That talks about Greater Hartford Mobility. And then we just have a number of ongoing planning studies. So whether that is I-84, Route 7 down in the Danbury area, the Route 7 and 15 interchange, 95 East, Brantford to Rhode Island is also going on, the 84 Route 8 interchange, time for CT on the rail side, which is really between New Haven and Greenwich. And then movable rail bridges is another study area and effort on the New Haven line. And then also, if you will, Route 15, just looking at both for the entrance and exit ramps and how do we improve the stop conditions and the acceleration and decels. So that's another area that we're also focused on. Next slide. Okay, so with that, I appreciate your time and attention, and I will turn it back over to Garrett.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. So chairs and rankings, we're open for any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Commissioner and Bureau Chiefs and Deputy Commissioner. I really appreciate the exhaustive look at the capital project, the capital plan that you put together for us. It is an exhaustive process. It's developed locally and it works its way up, but it's also developed from the perspective at 1,000 feet as well, or 10,000 feet, I guess we should say, with the grander needs of the state of Connecticut in mind, and that collaboration between our MPOs, our local community leaders, legislators, Department of Transportation, and the federal transportation has been a real benefit in your ability, I think, to access a lot of additional federal discretionary grants over the last few years. And we are deeply appreciative for your focus on that, and your sort of background in DC has helped us punch above our weight, I think, for the last few years. And so we're really appreciative of your focus and work with that. There are a number of issues in here for transportation committee members. You may have seen a lot of the policy ideas that we've worked on for the last 6 years included in the capital project request. And I am deeply appreciative for that as well. It takes a lot of effort to develop a lot of those policy areas. And you've certainly taken the legislative guidance that we provided in the last 6 years when it comes to traffic safety, pedestrian safety, the electrification of our fleet, moving towards a more sustainable transportation system, civilization upgrades, the community connectivity grant program. I remember you as a OPM deputy secretary, I think at that time, or undersecretary, myself and Representative McCarthy Vahey about 10 years ago, working on that in the earliest stages of the implementation. And so I do admire the DOT's approach to working collaboratively with legislators on developing a lot of the priority areas. And it's clear that you've personally taken an interest in these issues. And I think we've been ahead of the national movement in this area because of, frankly, your leadership and DOT's leadership over the last few years. This is not the DOT of road building and highway building only. This is a fully multifaceted, multimodal DOT. And I appreciate the great strides that you've made to that end. So this is supposed to be a big picture conversation. The Transportation Bonding Subcommittee will get into the weeds a little bit more over the next couple of weeks. And so I appreciate that your ability to talk on a top line level. But as you also know, there are a number of legislators who might have very specific questions about very specific projects. And I imagine that's what the next hour or so is going to be. Before I move over to that, I'm going to turn it over to my Senate Chair, Transportation Bonding, Senator Cabrera.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for coming, Commissioner and your team. Sorry for being a little late. We had a Hamden Girls Championship basketball team, and I would be remiss if I missed that. So I had to go do that. But thank you all so much. I also looking forward to collaborating with all of you and the committee to work on the various projects. I was hoping at a top level, if you can give me some idea of how staffing is going at the DOT, say in the last year.
Thank you for that question. So currently we have 3,040 staff on full-time employees at the DOT. We're authorized to have over 3,500 employees. It has been difficult to try and fill positions because everyone in the nation is trying to compete for the same talent. And Connecticut only produces so many engineers each year. Scott Hill, our chief engineer, has consistently brought this up, that Connecticut needs to be producing more engineers, but he's also gone outside of our boundaries down to New York City, where they are graduating a large number of engineers, up to Maine, stealing some engineers, Worcester, WPI. So it is a key focus of ours, and we are getting a large number of new employees coming in, but we also had a large number of retirements. On the highway operations side, who are, those folks are key to keeping our system moving, keeping it safe and passable. We've made some changes to try and get some mechanics in the door without their CDL, commercial driver's license, and we'll train them to get their CDL. So that way we can get more mechanics in the door, because that was an area we were really hurting. But it is, it's something I focus on all the time. Everyone in our agency is focusing on it all the time. And we appreciate the support of the legislature by authorizing the additional 206 positions in the last budget that allowed us to start the hiring process sooner, so that we weren't trying to play catch up like the rest of the country is.
Thank you very much for that answer, and very much look forward to working with you and your team on a collaborative nature to address that issue. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I go Senator Cohen, followed by Representative Horn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you all for being with us today in that incredibly thorough presentation. I did have a couple of questions. As you know, I was intimately involved in the passage of SB4 last year, together with my transportation colleagues. At the time, I was chairing the Environment Committee, and with the passage of that, there was several initiatives on electrification. I see in the presentation, you address the electrification, particularly of buses. And I just wonder, I know that there was a significant amount and continues to be a significant amount of planning involved in that. And some initial studies have come back showing that perhaps our transit districts are not equipped for charging of those buses. I just wonder if you could talk a little bit about the purchase of electric buses and the electrification of those fleets and what's involved and whether or not you're going to need to request additional capital funds in order to support the implementation of that public act.
So I think it would be presumptive to say whether we need additional capital funds. We've programmed into our five-year capital plan funding to support the local transit districts as well as the CT transit divisions to do a decarbonization approach. We have a Bureau of Public Transportation, which works directly with each transit district to identify what their capital needs are. And, the vast majority of capital needs and operating expenses come from the state through state funds as well as through federal funds. And we work with them to identify what is going to be needed to fully move to a decarbonized transit system. So for instance, we identified one of the competitive grants that we secured in partnership with SEAT in Southeastern Connecticut was $20 million to support them to do upgrades to their facility, very old antiquated facility. So we're working with them to build out a new facility that can be fully electrified when they do the conversion of vehicles. Working with Middletown and Estuary, which have now merged into one transit system, working with them to identify potential locations for a new facility, build out. So it's an iterative process working with each of them to build that electrical infrastructure that they need. And then we're doing that similarly with the facilities that we own for CT Transit in Waterbury, New Haven, or Hamden, Hartford, and Stamford. So we believe right now we're on a good path, but each year we're going to apply for the federal grants. The federal government has major discretionary grant programs called low emission, no emission buses, as well as bus and bus facilities. We've been very successful securing funds each year under that program. And that just supplements our state funds and our federal formula funds to achieve that mission.
Great, I appreciate that. And obviously looking forward to hearing more as we do move towards electrification and decarbonization. On safety, I'm obviously pleased to see the funding coming in there on enforcement and education. And certainly as we as a committee, the Transportation Committee, move forward some initiatives around safety, particularly with wrong way driving and the recommendations of Vision Zero, we're certainly going to need support there. I just wonder, has there been a shifting of priorities, if you will, since the legislature passed legalization of adult use cannabis and, particularly around enforcement? I know we're having a lot of discussions about that. And, the two particular officers that have been assigned and have the expertise to address some of that. Just wondering if you could talk a little bit about the funding there and if you've had to shift priorities.
Yeah, so we have, so through the legislature, when they passed the cannabis legalization change, there was also funding included in the budget to provide DOT with a little over $500,000 a year for cannabis education, enforcement issues. So what we've been doing is using that funding to help drive through some what are called drug recognition experts. Those are the most highly trained officers who can help identify what someone is impaired by, what substance. So what if they are not impaired by alcohol, what's going on? If they notice that they're impaired, they'll go through a battery of tests to identify through behavior what illegal substance or legal substance they're impaired by. So that funding has been used for that. But we have, with the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, we worked with our delegation to get a change in the law to federal law that would allow what is called the open container penalty. So as many know, because Connecticut does not have an open container law, we have to divert a portion of our funds towards, it used to be just alcohol impaired education enforcement. We worked with the federal delegation to broaden it to all impairment. So we've been using a large portion of those funds now to do cannabis education. You may have seen ads during the Super Bowl, on billboards, on social media. We micro target it towards certain demographics to just educate people that using marijuana and driving is still a DUI, because there is this myth out there that it's not, that, they think a DUI is just alcohol. So we've been pivoting our enforcement messaging to really raise that awareness. And we got actually a national award for that campaign, because we did not want to, put a stigma on using cannabis because it's legal, but we wanted to just raise awareness that it's illegal to drive impaired, and that includes driving impaired on marijuana.
Appreciate that. And very last question, although I have lots of questions, but I suspect everybody does. So I'll keep it short, but snow removal. Obviously it's been a really late season. I know we're not using bond authorizations for the purposes of snow removal in the state, but I do know that we are using bond authorizations for the purchase of snowplow equipment and facility maintenance or truck maintenance and what have you. Just wonder if you could talk a little bit about if there has been savings this year due to a light winter here in Connecticut, and how those funds are reallocated, and if they could be used to offset some of these other costs.
Yeah, so there definitely won't be any savings on the bonding side, because we have a very large backlog of equipment needs for a long time. We had very antiquated and old equipment that was driving up maintenance costs for our staff. We are very short on mechanics. So we had some garages where a single mechanic was responsible for 400 pieces of equipment, which is astronomical. And it just led to significant downtime for equipment during major storms. So we do expect to have savings on the appropriation side due to not as much overtime, due to a lower amount of snow. But that will probably be what we usually do each year, is we'll do a FAC at the end of the season, where we transfer funds from personal services to OE, other expenses, to cover the shortfall in OE, which I believe we definitely have a shortfall in OE already this fiscal year. So that's what we will be expecting to do at the end of this fiscal year, is to come to the legislature and OPM to request an FAC to transfer money, the savings from this light snow season, from our personal services account to OE.
Thank you. And we should all probably be knocking on wood now that I said we've had a light snow
Yes.
season, but sorry about that if I jinxed it. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Our Finance, Revenue and Bonding Chair, Representative Horn.
Who represents a district that just had 2 feet of snow not so long ago. So yes, March, unpredictable. Keeping to the efforts to keep this conversation as high level, at least from my perspective. My first question is looking at the big picture of the significant federal resources that are now available. Is Connecticut positioned to maximize those federal resources that could be coming to Connecticut?
Hi again, it's Scott Hill, Chief Engineer. Yeah, we 2 years before the new bill came out, we started implementing a program to make sure that we committed all our federal funds and to make sure we were well positioned to get the projects out that we needed to get out. We did that because we also knew that there was going to be a large retirement that happened last July, and we needed to be prepared to be able to lose some of our most senior folks in engineering and construction that oversee these projects, as well as highway operations, and then be able to turn around and deal with a larger program. So we started to hire temporary program managers and bringing them on to staff from consultant firms in order to backstop us while we had time to go out and recruit and hire folks. We did expand in all of our divisions. We had division of highways, division of traffic, division of facilities and transit. In all our engineering divisions, we turned around and we actually brought in more robust consultant support. We had outreaches to all the consultant communities in the Northeast to talk about the fact that we were going to need assistance while we rebuilt our internal staff to handle the program. And I'm happy to say that so far we've managed to get all the work out. And what we did, because we had such a short time frame to react, we actually took projects from the outer years and accelerated them into the current 22 year, the past 22 year now, in order to make sure that we did commit all our federal funding. And then that gave us time to backstop the outer years. And right now, 23 is fully funded, and we are going to commit all of our federal funding and state funding this year.
And Representative Warren, I'll add, I think what the legislature did previously by authorizing a large ramp up in funding for the Department of State funds, a 5-year program that allowed our agency to begin to put projects into planning and into design. So what we're seeing over this year, over next year, over the next year, that allowed us to have projects in that pipeline to pull in closer into our timeline. And then there are large major projects that are going into construction over the next year and 2 years that if we didn't have that state funding previously to do some design and planning work, we would not be in the situation where we are today to actually increase the amount of funding we're putting out the door. If we didn't have that, what we would have ended up doing is simply taking the federal funds in and supplanting our state funds, not increasing the amount of work going out the door and actually improving our infrastructure. We'd just be treading water. So I think Connecticut is in a good position as a result of the actions taken 5-7 more years ago.
Great, thank you. And I take also implicit in your answer that the staffing issues remain a concern and a possible constraint in the future, that you've done all you can to address in the immediate term, but we better keep an eye on that. Okay, so my other question is, as someone who represents 9 small towns, I look at the list here and see, some really, blinking red lights in terms of large projects, high impact projects from a variety of perspectives. And I wonder whether you could just talk a little bit about how you look at the smaller projects as well. For example, the local bridge program that funds the, repair of a lot of small bridges in my communities, for example, and just to make sure that you're, again, balancing that appropriately, but that you're looking at the smaller projects that really need attention as well as the bigger, higher, impact ones.
Yeah, so thank you for the question, Representative. We highlight within the information I gave you, maybe some of the higher priority projects and things that people might be familiar with and potentially, more impacted by. But certainly within the federal program, so we have the LOTSIP program. We have stood up the TRIP, which is more similar to the LOTSIP, but for the smaller towns. We are initiating that program. There's a number of intersection improvement projects or a number of safety projects that happen, in these smaller towns, these rural communities. Bridge program happens just frankly based on condition. So regardless of location, whether it's a larger community or a smaller community, we're also addressing those. So there's there's a lot of projects that are also happening in these smaller communities, and certainly we will continue to do those. That's really just a function of the federal program, and then also on the state side as well. In terms of, like I said, we address intersections, the TRIP program, some of the bridge things. So those are also happening within the smaller communities. Community connectivity is another program as well. So.
Yeah, I just wanted to highlight too, on the federal local bridge program, historically, what we did is we had an 80% federal match and a 10 or 20% town match. A few years ago, we started a pilot program where we were asking local communities, do you want us to manage the projects for you? We actually did a study and found that the state saved money if we managed the projects for the towns. The towns are still in charge of the project, but we use our consultant forces and our project management forces to actually oversee the project. We did in the new bill, there were actually 2 federal local bridge programs that had 2 different requirements. One of them was that they would be 100% eligible for federal funding. In order to avoid confusion at the local level, we made the decision to fund all federal local bridge qualifying, all bridges that are 20 feet or over 20 feet in length that qualify for federal money. we made a decision to make them 80% federal and 20% state. So either 100% federal or they're 80-20, but just to not confuse the local communities, we took that on and decided to just fund it all at the federal or state level. So that has really helped the communities because now that burden has been taken off for those large bridges.
And just to follow up on that, are there enough resources to fund all the projects that are applying to be part of that?
Yes. Yeah, it's not a significantly large project and there aren't that many over 20-foot bridges in the local community. So it's a cyclic program and I don't know the exact number that are ongoing right now, but it's not a large number of projects.
Right, thank you. And just as one final follow-up to that, I mean, just in terms of things I hear about in small towns, in terms of local bridges, but also just, and this is maybe more of a comment, but pedestrian safety, which I know has been an increasing concern of the Transportation Committee, and they have done a lot to do that, that is also a critical concern to small towns who experience all of the, in different ways, but all of the problems with, distracted driving, speeding through, every small town I represent, and little projects that also address pedestrian safety are of great importance to them as well. So it's mostly a comment.
Yeah, and
Thank you,
Representative
Steve.
Warren, on that point, so that you'll see in our request this year, for the first time ever, we're requesting $5 million a year to do those small, quick hit projects, quick build type thing that we can come into the community. If there's a road safety audit conducted and we identify some quick things, some signage, a crosswalk that we could do, it doesn't require major construction. Those funds would help us execute on those, not require a burden on the locals.
Great, thank you. And again, thank you for all you're doing to help make Connecticut safer. Thank you.
Thank you. And yes, I think as anyone who's ever heard me in this Transportation Committee chair, and then also as chair of this, the Community Connectivity Grant Program, those quick build programs, the bang for the buck, the dollar value of those is extraordinary in our local communities. How individuals approach intersection, how they view the Department of Transportation generally, the ability to transform a community. Those are some of the best dollars we spend as a state, and increasing the livability, walkability, and safety of our communities. The department's movement towards these road safety audits has helped a number of folks in the legislature reach out through, almost usually through your incredible legislative liaison, Ankleza, to get road safety audits for the communities that help them establish priorities for increasing safety. So any legislator who has a road in their community that they're concerned about, that they're seeing increased pedestrian fatalities or roadway safety concerns with, reach out to Ankleza and make sure you get a road safety audit on those locations, because it does help provide some meaningful options for your community. We have Ranking Member Cheeseman, followed by Ranking Member Kennedy, followed by Representative Farrar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here today. I believe you mentioned the study of whether it's the capital improvement study 2018 to 2050. Given the changes we've seen post-pandemic in terms of people's commuting patterns, working patterns, I know we've seen bus ridership come back strongly, I think largely driven by the free buses, but indeed that's come back, and by the fact that people who really need the buses really need the buses. I think Metro Rail ridership was at 67% still. If you look at my Shoreline East, 20%. Do you have any plan to revisit your capital plan in view of the changes we've made, because we're in a different world now? And I'd just like you to address that, because I do think as we look at this holistically, taking that into account, and also what we as a state are saying in terms of moving the decarbonization, how are we going to fund all this if we're no longer getting a major source of our revenue, which is the gasoline tax? But if you could first address how you may be viewing your future plans differently post-pandemic.
Sure. So the long-range transportation plan will need to be updated. I believe we're updating it. We're going to start the process next year to update that. And it's a cyclical program. We constantly update it, similar to the capital plan where we update it annually. The long-range transportation plan is every 5 years. And it's a federal document, federal driven document. The MPOs and the COGs are doing theirs right now. They're holding outreach. But your question about how the pandemic has shifted travel patterns is something I've asked our team a lot. I know Scott probably gets tired of me asking that question, but they've gone back and looked at some of our major projects when I've asked them, okay, are we using data from today or most recent data, because a new normal travel patterns, what is it showing us? And in some cases, the congestion is worse than what we saw before, because you had, what we used to have were these peaks in the morning and the evening, and the peaks have maybe softened a little bit, but it's spread out now. So the peaks have gotten less peaky, as one of our colleagues have said, but it's spread out across the entire day, and your travel has shifted a little bit. But when they've gone out and done the continuous counting, taken the data collection and shown that the demand is still there on our roadways. I don't know if you want to add in anything on that point. It's a constant.
Yeah, I mean, I will say that the commissioner constantly asks me when I did the data, when we have the traffic counts, what's going on. We were making a concerted effort to look at 2023, not 2018, and to make sure that when we're making decisions, they're based on what the traffic patterns are today, whether it be commuter traffic patterns or whether it be, vehicular traffic patterns and or pedestrian bicycle traffic patterns. So we are, I think you're right when I know you're right, when we start to work on, and we're just beginning to start to work on publishing the long range transportation plan. There was more of an emphasis in 2018 on alternate transportation, and it will continue to grow in the new plan. That long range plan looks way into the future and what will transportation be like. So it is a forward looking document, and it goes far enough out that these sort of conversations are going to happen where what do we think transportation is going to look like in the future, and how do we plan for that?
Yeah, and to get to your point on the public transportation side, so ridership is down on the rail side, but most of what's in the capital plan for the rail infrastructure, that is necessary just to maintain state of good repair. We have on the New Haven line, we have 4 movable bridges. One of them was built and opened during the McKinley administration. Those have to be replaced. The Northeast corridor is it's a lifeline for the entire economy from DC to Boston. Without that, our highways would be crippled because everyone would shift over. And so we need to do that. The federal government is, there's $22 billion for the Northeast Corridor Modernization Program that the federal railroads helping pump into that to take the burden off of the states. That is a constant effort with us. We sit on the Northeast Corridor Commission. So we're looking at all those projects, and every single one of those projects that we applied for a grant for, those are all just state of good repair because we underinvested for so long. When the asset came onto the state, it was already in a bad condition back in the 80s. So we're playing catch up for 40 years now.
Thank you. And that makes perfect sense. But I suppose my concern is as we plan, let's get everything to the state where it would be and maintain it. But take into account that if people are only commuting into New York twice a week, or, we are at the moment anyway, in a different reality. Quick question on hiring. I know Douglas Rogers, who was recently heading the school construction project, handed in his resignation because he found the slow pace of hiring in Connecticut and as your ability to hire. Now, obviously, you're in a very competitive market. I wondered if you could care to comment on that, because I know when the CREATES report was issued, they identified state hiring practices as a real hindrance to running efficient state government.
Yeah, so I know we've been working with the governor's office and Department of Administrative Services. There have been significant improvements since I came in as a deputy over 3 years ago. And we have streamlined a lot of the processes, but it does take a long time. And that's, I think, why the governor's office, I believe, proposed some legislation this session to help expedite it even more quickly. I think there was an emergency bill that passed, as well, that made some changes. So I can't comment on anything other than what I go through, and we have a great relationship with DAS and OPM, but I know the governor's office has been focused on this intensely.
Thank you, because I think that's vital, particularly when we're trying to recruit people who are in high demand. And finally, given the electric bus fire in Hamden, what's the current state? Because my understanding was we had still not resumed those electric bus services. So if you'd like to comment on that, please.
Sure. So the National Transportation Safety Board is still finalizing their report. But the manufacturer of the bus did issue a recall for the model that we had in place of the 12 electric buses in Hamden. So our team has been working hand in hand with New Flyer, the manufacturer, since July, when the event, thermal event occurred. And our team is very confident that the recall that is resulting as a result of the investigation that our team has done into the bus fire will resolve the manufacturing defect that we've identified. And so as soon as that recall is instituted, new software is installed in the buses, we do plan to put them back into service. And we've been conducting training for first responders about how to respond appropriately if there ever is a thermal event again. We did have trainings before that occurred, but we are broadening it to do as many first responders as are willing to participate in those trainings.
Thank you. And I did put forward a bill mandating training for all first responders on EV fires, simply because putting out a battery fire is very different from putting out a traditional fire. I don't think it's gotten any traction, but I do think that's something we need to keep an eye on. And particularly, are you going to have to equip your bus garages with specialist equipment in that case? All right. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you so much. Transportation Ranking Member Representative Kennedy, followed by Representative Farrar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here. It's a great learning experience, certainly for me. I also want to, I'm just going to bring it back to safety, because that's been one of our key focuses today, especially pedestrian safety. And I do want to thank you for all the education pieces. I've seen a lot on the radio, on the TV. And I think it's really helpful. I think you're really hitting it. At least I hope you are, especially when you consider that most people, when they start driving at about 18 years old. So it's a good refresher for all that. So I really do appreciate all you've done in that end. Distracted driving, I hope we can continue to find ways to improve that. But somehow, if we get through to people, it matters that you get to where you're going, and most importantly, that you get home that night. So I do appreciate all that. My quick question is on pedestrian safety and pedestrian walkways. Do you work with the municipalities as to the location of those, or do the municipalities put those into place? I wasn't sure how that works. If you could just explain that for me.
I'm going to have my division chief for traffic. I'm sorry. He's now the engineering administrator. My former division chief for traffic come up and answer the question. Mark Carlino. Thank you.
Good morning, Mark Carlino, engineering administrator for the department. We work quite often with municipalities. So whenever there is a crosswalk that's requested on a state road, we send an engineer out there to evaluate the proximity and if it is something that is appropriate. We want to make sure that sight lines are meeting a certain standards. We want to make sure that the speed of the traffic in the area is going to make it safe for a pedestrian. The worst thing we can do is endorse putting a crosswalk in an area that's not appropriate. The other things that we've done, just quickly to note, is we've worked with municipalities, all that were willing to work with us, to upgrade the pedestrian crossing signs, not only on state roads, but also on all the municipally owned roadways over the last couple of years. So we had great participation. I think out of 169 towns, we probably had about 130 that participated. And in the upcoming future years, we're looking to do even more to try to enhance those crossing areas. So I hope that helps.
I appreciate that. Thank you, sir. Because pedestrian safety is just so important. We've seen too many incidents this past year. And then my final question is actually on freight rail safety. In light of some of the incidents over the last few months or so, can you speak to safety with our freight rail lines and what are we doing as far as making sure that those lines are safe? The potential for any kind of environmental damage or anything along that line, just the concerns. I know some of our freight rail systems are rather old, so if you could just speak to that, please. Thank you.
Absolutely. So we do have a great partnership with the freight rail companies that operate in Connecticut. The legislature in the past has supported bonding funds to help upgrade some of the freight rail assets, and we've been a strong supporter of that. I know there's been efforts this year by the Freight Rail Association to secure additional funding for additional upgrades, because as with the passenger rail system, the freight rail system is old, right? The freight rail came into place well before many of the roadways in the state. And same with our passenger rail system. So the state of Connecticut does own a large number of the freight rail miles. And then we lease them to the companies to operate and maintain them in a good condition, a passable condition. And we'll partner with them. We'll do inspections as well. But we also partner with the Federal Railroad Administration to ensure that there's constant communication back and forth. But I know the freight rail groups have come in to talk to us about potentially greater investment in improving those conditions. But we do drills as well. We actually have one coming up. I was at one last year where we'll do drills with simulating a derailment and what occurs if there's an incident on the railroad. We'll get local first responders on the scene to be trained on how to respond appropriately. So we want to make sure that our state is always ready in case something does occur on the railroad.
Thank you, sir. And I do appreciate that collaboration that you have with the freight rail system. It's certainly very important. That's all I have for today. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Farrar. Just a moment. We're going to go to Senator Fazio, followed by Representative Farrar. And for folks who are online joining us today, OFA, Patrick Mallon, has done an incredible job compiling a breakdown of the 2-year capital STO bond request for legislators here. So make sure if you haven't opened that and seen that, you get a hard copy when you next come into the building, or we'll make sure we have it sent out to you. I believe Bree Wolf has sent it out to every member. It's an exhaustive job that Patrick has done today, and it's really, really helpful for the committee to kind of get a line item viewpoint of everything inherent in the STO request. All right, Senator Fazio, followed by Representative Farrar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Representative Farrar, and thank you, Commissioner, for a very thorough and thoughtful presentation. Stepping back to the high level, obviously, the context of this session is that we're debating other priorities like middle-class tax relief and increased funding for vital social programs. So I do want to try to understand the overall levels of requests for the authorizations. Do you expect the issuances in the end to be in line with the large increases in authorizations in the request?
No, issuances never line up with authorizations.
I
Because capital projects take over a decade to execute. So we will, in order to obligate a project and obligate federal funds against that project, we need an authorization for funds for that project. Otherwise, we're not going to start the process on that project.
Okay, so are you saying you don't expect the overall sort of fiscal burden that follows that obviously has to be amortized over years to be kind of commensurate with the 70% increase in authorizations?
No, issuances will not go up 70% in this upcoming biennium. But Gary, you want to comment on what we expect for issuances? Introduce yourself.
How are you? Gary
Good.
Pesco Solido, the Bureau Chief of Finance and Administration, DOT. So the issuances this year, as every year, we work with the Treasurer's Office very closely to calculate for the issuance what we anticipate for cash flow needs for the year. This year, the estimation is going to be somewhere in the $850 million range, I believe. That issuance is probably going to take place in September.
But in fiscal year 20 425 theoretically under a higher level of authorizations, a much higher level of authorizations, what would you expect roughly the issuances to go up if your authorizations are going up 70%?
I hate to say that, it's hard to tell exactly. It has a lot to do with the individual projects that are underway and what phase they're in, and the timing of the project as it rolls out. Because again, the issuances are always based on cash flow. So depending on what the needs of the cash are to pay each year, we don't want to ever go issue more bonds on the street than we need cash for. Otherwise, we're paying interest to keep banking our keep cash in the checking account. So generally speaking, it's usually tempered and leveled. I would imagine at some point those projects will escalate through the process, and at some point it will go out, but it'll only go out at the needs of the cash flow of the agency at that time.
And I'll add, Senator, so if you look at our history, we're going up probably around 6% per year in actual expenditures, which is much more closely aligned with issuances. The reason authorizations are going up so much this year is that in order to capitalize on the federal funds available in the discretionary grant program, if you look at 28% of the request is tied to the Northeast Corridor Investment Program, and that's not guaranteed. But in order to apply for those federal funds, we had to demonstrate that the governor was supportive. So that's where the governor proposed to the legislature increasing authorizations. If we are successful in getting $2 billion from the federal government, we need to be able to match that. And if we don't, then we return all that federal funds. But that's where the authorization request, 28% of the total request is just tied to the Northeast Corridor Railroad.
And I figured that was a large part of the explanation. But I'm also trying to understand that you assume is the way that a lot of that funding is going to work, that we are reimbursed for outlays that we make as a state, or is it that the federal funding would be topping off what we already spend? So there's the federal monies coming on top of the state monies, rather than, or is it that the federal money's kind of reimbursing what we put out in the first place?
Yeah, so it's always a reimbursement basis, right? We will, federal funds don't actually come into our checking account necessarily. We get reimbursed for expenditures, but without the matching funds available, we will not be able to spend any federal funds. We will not execute a project unless we know there's state funds there to match those federal funds.
Yeah. So when we do look at a large increase in authorizations, it does catch the eye as a legislator. And so that's what I'm trying to understand, that this is to make us eligible, but you do not expect the actual outlays or issuances or burden on the state to be a 70% increase. You need the authorizations in order to become more eligible for the federal programs and monies.
Yeah, many of these authorizations we're requesting for, especially on the railroad side, those issuance for some of those projects are going to come a decade from now. But over time, yes, the state of Connecticut will have to repay the bonds that are taken in order to support our infrastructure projects. And that the needs of our state's infrastructure are great. We have very old infrastructure. And if it were not for the federal funds, we would not be doing any of these projects. But we have to match that at the 20% match, or in sometimes a 50% match.
Yeah. And I appreciate that. And, certainly as legislators, we're also, considering the trade-offs and all the other priorities. And so, it would be, I guess, I would love to see, the analysis and projections of what the like for like, against the baseline of state spending, state outlays would be, given how much the federal programs are going to change the sort of accounting of it all. So that's something I would look for and will try to understand better. But in the meantime, I do appreciate your time and your testimony.
Representative Farrar, followed by Representative Smith, Representative Baumgardner, Representative McCarthy-Vahey. So we're going to start Representative Farrar. If anyone else wants to get in the queue, let me know.
Get on board. Thank you, Chair. Thank you all for being here. Great to have you. And I know I got my colleagues to get on board with some songs over here. I have two questions, again, hopefully kind of just understanding some of the information that you all shared with us in a little more detail. First is, just in regards to overall kind of the capital plan and some of the metrics that were mentioned in the capital plan. I certainly appreciated the acknowledgement of safety, congestion, increased mobility for all users. But I wanted to know a little bit more if there is anything in particular that you all are looking at in the metrics of those reduced vehicles miles traveled. Because I think, again, as a state, we know that there is a lot of funding that is directed and will continue to be directed from the federal level at our highways and our roads. But at the heart of it, we need to reduce our use of our cars, not just for quality of life, but also for our planet. So could you all kind of speak to how vehicle miles traveled fits into any of your assessments of these projects?
Yeah, so Governor Lamont issued an executive order 2 years ago, 2021. Yeah, 23-1, sorry. Too many executive orders over the COVID time. And so we actually published on our website our target for VMT reduction. So that is on our website, and I can send it to you. I forget what our total target reduction for VMTs is. What we did is we developed a methodology to identify VMT reduction per capita. We felt that was the most appropriate way. We looked at what other states have been doing in this space as well. Talked to Minnesota and a few other states, I think Washington and California, to talk about their approach. But we're also looking at, so VMTs are one component, greenhouse gas reduction is another. Our team working under Kim Lassay, our Bureau Chief of Policy and Planning, is working on developing how do we develop a methodology to measure GHG reduction from the transportation sector and from the specific programs, because it's very difficult to identify specific GHG apportionment by a project base, but you can do it at a larger level from a program. So we've been talking a lot with Colorado about how they're doing that and learning lessons learned from them. I know many in the transportation committee have been keenly focused on that. So we've been working to try and address that. So I'll get you the specific VMT reduction target number. I don't have it at the top of my head, but it's published on our website, and I'll forward it to you after this meeting.
That would be helpful. And it sounds like you all are hoping to kind of go in the direction of having that type of metric included in the assessment of programs that would be coming forward in these plans.
Yeah, so essentially it will form a part of our long-range transportation plan, the route our long-range transportation plan, which then feeds the development of our capital plan.
Thank you for that. And then I did have one other question. It was brought up briefly earlier, which is the community connectivity grants that you all have offered. I know that there is a proposed increase, which was exciting to see, but could you all speak to the demand for these projects? And I just want to have a better sense of if this 12 million will actually meet the demand, and again, so many of the needs that are in our communities.
Good morning.
Nice to see you. Thank
Nice
you.
to see you, Representative Kim Lassay, Bureau Chief of Policy and Planning. Our community connectivity grant program, of course, is extremely popular for many reasons. And we're actually in the middle of a current solicitation right now, $10 million in solicitation. And that is, we get many more requests than we're able to meet, but those are screened and ranked. And that's an internal process, and we are working to get as many projects out as we can, looking at what is the value, also looking at what are they doing for safety, and how are the towns utilizing that money. We're also trying to make sure that that's spread out. If towns have already had a previous solicitation that they haven't been able to bring to fruition yet, we're asking them to wait and to finish that project until they're eligible for another one.
Do you have any sense if the $12 million will meet the demand, or would you suggest that that should be increased to kind of meet the demand that you're seeing?
Well, I don't think any competitive solicitation will ever meet demand out there, but I think that's the amount that we are comfortable actually Kim's staff able to actually execute and monitor that level of grants, because what we have seen is a large number of the grants that were awarded are slow to get off the ground. And that's putting a burden on our staff to help monitor those projects. So increasing to 13 million per year per the governor's proposed budget, I think is what we're comfortable actually administering every year.
Okay, that's helpful. And then just one final question. I know that in the proposals, particular around commuter rail, the first step on the Hartford line is to pursue the double tracking project. And I know that there is a proposed grant that was put forward, but could you all kind of offer a little more information about what the kind of the scope and timeline of the double tracking is, especially as we look towards the 5-year plan, hopefully, of pursuing train stations?
Yeah, so I'll have to get the exact timeline of the project schedule, but higher level, what our plan is for the Hartford line is first, we want to finish the double tracking on the Hartford line to expand the total number of trains that can operate over that corridor. With all the discussions occurring in Massachusetts about their visions for rail, we want to be able to be ready to capitalize off of possibility for running more Amtrak trains up and through the corridor without diminishing the number of CT rail trains, Hartford line trains that operate. We also are pursuing federal funds for to do a study for what's called a sealed corridor to improve rail grade crossings. A lot of the Hartford line crossings, as you know, are at grade, meaning vehicles have to cross the railroad tracks, unlike the New Haven line, which is largely grade separated. If we're able to secure funds for that, that then allows opportunities in the future for quiet zones to reduce the number of train horns that occur that are currently federally mandated. And then we also have additional rail stations in the capital program listed under overprogramming. So those would then be also identified. We finished the design work. We're continuing the design work on those stations. And then as the other capital projects are completed, those would then be looked at for potential next projects to execute upon.
Thank you for that. And again, I just appreciate kind of hearing at the outset, really the thought about going into the metrics that we look at and how that determines that, again, we're really ensuring that we're reducing our car usage. Really, I hear day to day just how much people want to be more connected to alternative modes of transportation, walking, biking, using the train and bus. So I appreciate the acknowledgement of that in our planning as well moving forward, and appreciate the increase in some of those budgetary items as well. So thank you everyone for your answers, and thank you to the chair.
Thank you, Representative. I could have sworn we'd have some questions about, I think it's New Britain Avenue or a couple other issues. Maybe we're reserving those questions for the follow-up with the Transportation Bonding Subcommittee. Yes. Representative Smith to be followed by Representative Baumgartner. Representative Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just if I could follow up on something my co-delegate member from Milford, Representative Kennedy, brought up earlier in speaking with Mr. Carlino. There is a requested illuminated pedestrian crosswalk that has been requested on US 1 Bridgeport Avenue, which is a state road. This was requested over a year ago. We have already begun work on it, but it has been confined to the local public works department, and the city engineer has been doing all the work at this point. I have checked in with my legislative contact at DOT, Ms. Claza, who was unfailingly helpful in any questions I have with DOT, but this wasn't even on the radar. My question simply is, if there is a state road project, and this crosswalk is very important because it actually is a means for pedestrians to go from one restaurant to another. And in the warmer weather, there's a lot of traffic and it's just fraught with possible dangers. I know that the city engineer has been working on it and has been consulting with DOT, who've had some suggestions, but it still doesn't appear on the DOT radar. First of all, why, if it's a state road, why is the local public works department dealing with it at all? Is that routine? And what can I do to further the profile of this project so that we might be able to get it accomplished before the warm weather and the increased foot traffic which occurs down in Devon?
Thank you for the question. I'll have to look into the details of that particular crossing, but in general, we work directly with the local traffic authority who has legal jurisdiction on the traffic matters within that municipality. But once we get the request and have engineers out there looking at the crossing and deem that it's a location that could be made safe, the first step in the process, working with the municipality, is for the municipality to put in ADA accessible ramps. And once that is done, then the state of Connecticut will come through. We'll put in all the appropriate road signage and warning signs, and then paint that crosswalk. So like I said, I'll talk with Ann after this meeting, get some of the more details on this and follow up myself with the Public Works Director.
Frank, you unmuted, then you muted yourself again.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much. And in fact, this has gone through the traffic authority, which is who is attached to the traffic division of the Milford Police Department. He's passed on it, so I know it's being worked on. It's just something where it's hard to find out whose jurisdiction is. But if I could get information back to my Public Works Director, I would appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Representative Smith. Representative Baumgartner, followed by Representative McCarthy-Vahey, followed by Representative DiCaprio.
Thank you, Commissioner, and it's great to see you and your team today. I do want to extend a deep appreciation to a few folks who came down to Stonington about a couple of weeks ago in the aftermath of one of my constituents, Mr. Gary Piver, a custodian at Stonington High School, was killed in the dark of night, struck by a motor vehicle while biking back to home. He bikes regularly biked regularly to work, and that's how he got around town, as do many folks in our community. And about a week and a half beforehand, met with the district director with DOT, along with the legislative delegation for Stonington and town officials to talk about making significant improvements to Route 1, pedestrian and bicycle improvements. So the timeliness, again, just appreciate your department understanding the urgency of this. I would note, I believe Ann was there as well. And so you had folks of all stripes, whether it's the design team, whether it's the engineering team, the legislative liaison team, because it's all hands on deck. We have a crisis on our hands. And so my question is, we had a very nuanced discussion about what can be done and how quickly, right? And these obviously require, funds. So, I understand that bridges, for example, where, bridges and culverts are funded differently. When you install or the state pays for a bike lane, the maintenance would be left to the town. So there's a lot of kind of moving parts to how our infrastructure is funded by the state. And can you speak to what municipalities should be doing in terms of communicating with your office, your department, so they know what is required in order to implement these bold infrastructure solutions?
Yes, thank you, Representative Baumgartner. So we do have a good working relationship with our municipalities, constant communication between with their DPWs, their local traffic authorities, there's their town or city engineers. I think one of the most important things to do is to begin to plan. Some of the most successful communities that have had the most significant investments in bike and pedestrian infrastructure and safety upgrades have been those have laid out a long range plan for investment, and then you can begin to attack it piece by piece. And they come to us and they show us the plan, and they apply for the funds. They apply for lot SIP funds. They apply for community connectivity grant program funds. So the city of New Britain is a prime example. The city of New Haven, but the city of New Britain really, it was a 10-year plan for improvements for bikes and pedestrians, and she completed it because Mayor Stewart went piece by piece, and she knew it was going to be a long process, and there was a constant back and forth working with us and our engineers and with their community on what the needs were. So I think there's a lot of planning funds out there federally now, working through your Council of Government and your MPO to go after some of those Safe Streets for All grants, to do some complete streets plans and Vision Zero plans, I think is the key thing to start with.
Thank you. And I also want to acknowledge Craig Babowitz, Natasha Facto, Kevin Tedesco, Anna Bergeron, and I believe I mentioned Ann Clayza, but I say this because Stonington, we are the southeastern corner of the state. I'm sure we all have heard this time and time again, the forgotten corner, if you will. And in today's age where we have Zoom, most of this committee, obviously zooming into this committee, you know, I think it is so important to have those face-to-face conversations, especially understanding kind of the pain that many of our communities have faced when we have lost loved ones and neighbors and friends to pedestrian and cyclist fatalities as a result of motor vehicles. So I appreciate, obviously, you know, you chairing Vision Zero and your continued commitment to this, to these issues. I'll shift gears quickly. Gold Star Bridge, obviously a big chunk of the your capital budget, and was certainly supported with the support of significant federal investment. I was there the first day of session when Secretary Pete Buttigieg came down. It's a PLA project. I think everyone wins, and certainly the taxpayers as well. So can you speak to the flexibility of that kind of grant program, and kind of how you know, what we need to do to support you to be able to implement, you know, or be able to leverage those dollars when you get a significant grant like that?
So generally what we do for competitive discretionary grants is we will apply for projects that are already in the capital plan, which then frees up resources to apply to other projects that maybe were in the outer years of the capital program, to be able to pull them in sooner. And in many cases, alleviate the burden on state taxpayers. So we had that project. It was going to be largely state funded. And what we were able to do with the 158 million in federal funds is redirect those resources to other projects that were unfunded or funded in the out years. And so it's a great win for us in Connecticut.
Leslie, and just before you became commissioner, I saw you down in Norwich for one of the public information sessions regarding Shoreline East. You know, thanks to the good work of the Transportation Committee over the last few years, certainly appreciate your support in this, Mr. Chair. Now it's been recommended as a result of preliminary reading through some of the preliminary draft that officially recommended by DOT to extend Shoreline East from you know, all the way to the westerly border and beyond, to connect up to Providence, which is you know, very significant for our region. In Mystic alone, we are experiencing 1.8 million visitors a year, and that keeps on growing. Now, you know, in Groton, have the largest private employer in the state of Connecticut with Electric Boat. More folks are coming into the region, and we need to get people in and out, not just with motor vehicles, but using our buses, using, you know, cycling, you know, by biking, walking. So you know this, what can we do to help to, you know, get that rolling, so we can build some train stations in Groton, extend it to Mystic and beyond?
So the legislature did direct the DOT to do this very large comprehensive plan looking at surface transportation, bus and rail in Eastern Connecticut. It takes a lot of time and a lot of effort to do such a grand, large, in-depth plan. So we should be completed with that study later this calendar year, and then we'll submit recommendations in that plan to the legislature. But it's very intensive. It can take up to a year to do a single rail station potential location. This is looking at multiple locations, multiple rail lines, and we want to make sure it's a very comprehensive report that we deliver back to you.
Thank you again, Commissioner. And, you know, whether it's design build, the tip tap, community to connectivity, these are not things that this legislature was talking about several years ago. So, you know, now we're doing, you know, let's go, let's get this done. I know that's the name of the 30-year capital plan. So, you know, here to help and keep up the great work. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. We have Representative McCarthy-Vahey, Representative DiCaprio, Representative Steinberg, Representative Bronco, and DOT has to leave soon for a road safety awareness announcement that we're doing. So I'm going to ask legislators to move quickly, but Mr. Commissioner, that also implies that you'll answer quickly as well. Representative McCarthy-Vahey.
Thank you, Chair Lamar, Chair Horn, Chair Cabrera. Thanks to the DOT. In public health, we limit ourselves to 5-minute exchanges. So I will not ask you about the COG DOT collaborations. I will not ask you about the future costs of rail and rail fares, and I will not also ask about bus fares. I will do that at another time. I have 3 questions, and so I'm going to tell you what those are about and ask also, as the chair said, for brief answers, which we can discuss more. 1 is related to roundabouts, 2 is related to the special transportation fund, and 3 about housing at transit centers. Roundabouts. We've talked a lot today, and I'm really grateful for the cultural shifts that are occurring at DOT at every level to consider all users, particularly vulnerable users. I'm hoping to see dozens and dozens of roundabouts all over our state. And I'm wondering if you are seeing a positive response from communities, or if communities are embracing the opportunity. And if so, about how many roundabout projects are you looking at right now?
I can get you the number that we are proposing. We love roundabouts ourselves. We've adopted that as a culture. We try to look at intersections, and if the roundabout will work, we will put a roundabout in first. Initially, when we go into new communities of roundabouts, we get a lot of pushback, concern about using the roundabout and the safety of the roundabout, but we have a lot of statistics nationally. You know, the awkwardness and uncomfortableness of entering a roundabout causes you to slow down, and the accidents that occur are not fatalities. So you might have a fender bender, but that's what we want you to do. We want you to enter the roundabout and slow down and pay attention, not just speed through an intersection light and cause a serious injury. So yeah, we are. I will get back to you with the number that we're planning.
Thank you. Thank you very much for highlighting the fact that at those lower speeds, certainly vulnerable users are much more likely to survive a crash. And my condolences, Rep. Baumgardner, to your constituent. The second is related to the Special Transportation Fund, which I'm sure might bring some PTSD for Representative Lamar. But as we look at the future balance of the Special Transportation Fund and how we collect revenues, I know Rep. Farrar talked about vehicle miles traveled. I've talked about that with respect to our STF in the past. How is that future impact looking in terms of our ability to bond and what that means for the future?
So our state will need to address this in the coming years. The Special Transportation Fund is it's in the black for the next few years, but it will be dipping back down a few years out from now. The whole nation is having to address this issue. It was based on a different model of transportation. And so I think all of us will need to work together in the next couple of years to look at the long range health of the transportation fund.
And Commissioner, thank you. Just a quick follow-up on that in terms of the impact to bond.
Yeah, so revenues need to cover twice the debt payments. The coverage ratio is at least two for our 20-year bonds. So that is something that we need to look at. We're looking at opportunities to maybe use appropriations to cover projects, go after federal loans that have a much longer repayment schedule and lower interest rates. So every option's on the table there.
I appreciate that. And I recognize that this legislature is not an active conversation about this issue, but I think it needs to remain at the front of our minds. And then the final question that I have is about housing and our transit centers. I know this isn't planning and development, and but I do want to know in terms of looking at any potential bonds or plans going out. Is this something that you continue to explore as we look at, as Representative Cheeseman referenced, some changes in patterns in how we work and live?
Yeah, so actually in New Haven and Stamford, two major transportation hubs, we're looking at state land there, working with the municipalities that could be put out to bid to do infill directly adjacent to the train stations to get more people living and working directly adjacent there. And we think it's a win-win for all involved if we can do that.
That's wonderful. And I look forward to more conversations about that as well. Thank you so much for your answers and your time today. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Representative DiCaprio, followed by Representative Steinberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And mine, I only have one question or looking for some comments. Commissioner, maybe this might go to Paul Rizzo, Mr. Rizzo. But can you share a little bit about the work, the ongoing work or initiatives regarding highway clearance, you know, in the state? What has DOT been up to as far as that and coordination with other agencies?
Yeah.
Good afternoon, Paul Rizzo, Bureau Chief of Highway Operations. Are you referring to our traffic incident management training?
Yes, along those lines, as far as what initiatives or ongoing work is happening there.
So we conduct traffic incident management training. We provide cost-free training for all first responders. And we've been reaching out to all communities, providing that training. We're actually now going out to the community where in the beginning we were having, the first responders come to us, which includes not only fire and police. We also include the recovery services. And now we're actually in all state police cadets come to our training also, so that they understand traffic incident management right from the start of their career.
Thank you for that. I know there's someone mentioned with the EV vehicles and there's alternate fuel vehicles, which there's a lot of complexity on the road now, which certainly, training is obviously beneficial. So thank you for that. And I'd like to probably maybe have a sideline conversation with you about that. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Steinberg, followed by Representative Bronco and Representative Mushinski. And then the commissioner really has to go. In fact, I might ask him if he needs to leave and take half the staff with him. But Representative Steinberg, the floor is yours.
Thank you. One quick question for you, Commissioner. I was heartened to hear about the increase in bus ridership. I was wondering whether, again, the change in commuting patterns and the like affected our efforts to develop a fully integrated multimodal bus plan for the state. We still have a lot of issues with transit districts, particularly along the coastline. And I think some of them are struggling to figure out how this is all going to work out in the future. Is there any sort of update on where we stand with our state bus plan?
Representative Steinberg, so we do work really closely with every single transit district. We have kicked off a statewide study of how to integrate all the transit districts to have uniform policies across the board, including a fare structure. And we work with all of them on their capital plans directly. And we continue to do so. And to try and have a uniform fare collection system.
Thank you. Obviously, I would like to know more about that. And when you're ready, I'd love to have the conversation about how the plan is affecting a lot of the transit districts. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Representative Bronco, followed by Representative Mushinski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Commissioner and staff, for coming today for the presentation. Much appreciated. And the good representative from Fairfield sort of preempted my question on roundabouts, actually. But my district, I represent Naugatuck, and we do have one of those dreaded roundabouts come to town. And I say dreaded because in large part, the residents are not happy about it. I went to a DOT presentation probably a couple years ago now, talking about roundabouts and the benefits, and I was sold. So I think it's a good idea. I'm wondering, I know the statistics kind of prove they're safer and that's all good. I'm wondering if there's any follow-up on the roundabouts that have been put in. If there's any follow-up with customer satisfaction, if you will, people using those roundabouts daily, and do they like them or not?
Yeah, it's sort of a interesting dynamic out there where most of the potential users are extremely nervous, and like I mentioned before, and once they start to use them and they get more comfortable, they find that what we're seeing nationally as well as in Connecticut is they are well received. There are whole communities that I know of that were against them that have just embraced them, and they want them installed now at every intersection because they can get through quicker, the movements are quicker, they're not stuck at lights. So it does increase mobility as well, the ability to get through a whole corridor. more quickly than all the lights that are there. So, yeah, it's a phenomena that we're dealing with on a national level, that communities are generally very nervous and don't want them, but once they get them, they embrace them and they like them and they start asking for more.
Yeah, thank you for that. I suspect a lot of the pushback initially is just because it's a big change from what people are used to. But again, after learning the statistics and seeing how they function, I think it's a good idea. So I'm looking forward to that project getting underway in Naugatuck. So that's all. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Representative Mashinsky, taking us home.
Okay. If you don't have time to answer, Commissioner and staff, you can send the answers later, but here's the questions. First, I want to thank you for the Hartford line, which I do use frequently, and I hope it'll continue to reduce traffic congestion on 91. The Hartford line is just a gift, and I'm just so happy with it. First question, can we do a pilot to help trucking companies transition to electric trucking? If we got a volunteer to do that, could we help them install charging stations so they could make the jump, maybe with the help of DOT funding and Green Bank? If you want to think about it and respond later, that's okay too.
I can at least start the conversation, Representative. Thank you. Kim Lassay, Bureau Chief of Policy and Planning. There's certainly some larger challenges with medium and heavy duty charging facilities that we're looking into. Our sustainability and resiliency team that has produced our NEVI plan is certainly looking into that. But there's some challenges as far as availability, and also coming up with what's going to be the standard for those. So there's a lot of conversations ongoing, including those that are in front of PURA, but we can certainly provide you with some information on that. You know, we'd like to see this go as widespread as it can, obviously for many reasons. So, you know, I would say that we're a willing partner, but there's certainly a lot of details to figure out on that medium and heavy duty side for right now.
Okay. I'm glad you're working on it. That's good news. Is there any progress on the sound barrier list?
Yes, in fact, we are in the midst of the first stages of our type 2 noise study that is statewide. And so what that study will produce is a priority list for us. And we are anticipating that we will have that list at the end of this calendar year. We are on schedule with that project.
Okay. And the last question, is DOT working on bus shelters at major shopping areas so we can get people to actually use the bus instead of their cars? I know that the weather is a factor for people. If the shelters aren't there, they do not like to take the bus.
So good afternoon, Ben Limmer, Bureau Chief of Public Transportation. Thank you for the question. We certainly are. We just started a bus shelter study for the whole state. We're working with the local MPOs on a comprehensive program. I'll certainly send more information as soon as we have it. Sorry for the short answer. It's my second month, but happy to meet you all. Ready for more tough questions.
Okay, and thank you for all that information. And I would also request the VMT sheet that you're going to be sending to Representative Farrar. Could I have a copy too? Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you to my fellow Hartford line compatriot. See Representative Mashinsky on the Hartford line. I, as many people know, almost always take the train to Hartford, and I see Representative Mashinsky quite frequently on her way up. Welcome, Ben. The first time meeting you, seeing you in this new role, and I really appreciate your taking the helm here. I really do appreciate the time and work you've put in. And I think Representative Mashinsky needs to join the Transportation Committee. She identified 2 core priorities that we advanced out of committee this year. We did do a statewide bus shelter study and implementation plan, as well as the noise barrier moving to next stages of implementation there. So I do appreciate those questions. Are there any comments from Senator Cabrera at this time? I think we are adjourned. Thank you so much for your time here today. We really do appreciate it. We'll be back with the Transportation Bonding Subcommittee as a standalone entity in a few weeks. Senator Cabrera and I will get out date and time of that next meeting. So please be aware of email requests coming, calendar requests coming from Bree Wolf in the coming days. Thank you all and have a great day.